This presentation on basic botany for landscape contractors is a very important one. It's not that lengthy, but there are a lot of basics of botany that you need to think about as you review for your landscape contractor exam. Most of the questions on that exam related to botany are going to be basic plant science and the terminology and some of the terminology that's involved with plant science. It's extremely important to you as a landscape contractor. Starting off with plant parts and their functions. A plant can be divided into two groups of parts: vegetative parts, sexual parts. Vegetative parts are going to be your roots, stems, buds, and leaves, where your sexual reproductive parts are going to be flowers, fruits, and seeds. So when we start looking at a plant, we start at the ground. We start at the roots, if you will. Roots originate from the lower portion of the plant or the cutting, and they have certain functions. They function as ways to take up water and minerals from the soil or from the substrate that they're growing in. They're for anchorage and support to keep the plant from blowing over or moving, and they may be for food storage as well as for propagation. The stems are the next layer, and if we look at those stems and understand their structure and function, stems support buds and flowers and leaves, and they're primarily the structure of that plant. And they function as a conduit of water, minerals, and sugars. So if we think about stems, we think of them as being both the plumbing and the framework of a plant. Stems are going to be made up of nodes, internodes, and buds. Inside the stem, there are three very distinct portions. The phloem is on the outside. It conducts food and hormones located near the bark. And so it's going to move sugars and starches and those things from the leaves down. So phloem's down. Xylem, on the other hand, is a ring of cells on the inner portion under the bark, and it conducts water and minerals up into the leaves and the other portions of the plant. And finally, cambium is a thin layer of cells that are responsible for cell division throughout the whole plant and for active growth. It's located just between the xylem and the phloem. When we look at leaf bud orientation, this is part of the plant that we can actually see and sometimes helps us identify the plant. A bud is a undeveloped shoot from which leaves or flowers arise. Leaf buds tend to be more pointed and less plump than flower buds. They're both lateral and terminal, as well as some adventitious buds. Adventitious buds are not readily seen, but they may come out in various places of the plant should one of the lateral or terminal buds be removed. Leaf bud orientation on stems can help us identify certain plants. So we're going to look at some of the slides here showing some of the different types of leaf bud orientation, including opposite, alternate, whorled, and basal. Opposite buds and leaves are like this ligustrum. This plant has buds and leaves that are opposite, and they essentially have two buds on either side of the stem at the same node. Alternate buds and leaves are leaves that actually come out on opposite sides of the stem, but alternate where they come out, and so we call that alternate orientation. Leaves and buds arrange one per node. Notice on this picture there are actually one bud per node. Whorled buds are a case where you have leaves and buds arranging three per node. And this particular oleander has three buds and leaves that are whorled. And finally, basal buds are plants where they have several buds right at the ground. This particular dandelion has basal buds, and you'll notice they're laying slap on the ground at the crown. And so those buds are very tiny and they're compact, and many of them could be 5 to 7 or even more. Leaves buds are arranged 3 to 5 per node. Leaves have a primary function. The leaves' function is to absorb light and thereby begin the process of photosynthesis or sugar production. So when we're talking plant physiology, this is where photosynthesis occurs inside of that leaf. There are certain parts of the leaf that you should know: the blade, petiole, and the stipules. In some cases there may be a lack of a petiole, in which case that particular leaf arrangement is referred to as sessile. There are three basic kinds of leaf arrangements. Simple. A simple leaf has a blade and a defined petiole. Pinnately compound leaves have a rachis, or a very strong central petiole which connects little leaflets to that system. And sometimes that rachis is referring to that central petiole with leaflets. Palmately compound leaves have a palm-shaped arrangement of leaflets attached to one petiole, and they're typically 3, 5, and 7, rarely any more than 7. There are various leaf shapes. Here's several kinds of leaf shapes, from cordate, deltoid, elliptic, lanceolate, oblanceolate, obovate. And these shapes actually have something to do with the Latin term that they're used to describe them. Flowers. Now when we think about flowers, many of us think of flowers being the unique, most desirable portion of the plant. But a flower has one purpose, one sole function. It's for sexual reproduction. It contains all the reproductive organs of a plant, the male pollen and the female ovule, plus accessories of petals, sepals, and nectar glands. Here are the flower parts on a perfect and complete flower. You have the pedicel. The pedicel is what attaches that entire flower to the stem. Above the pedicel, you have a receptacle. The receptacle will ultimately grow around the ovary to produce a fruit. Above that receptacle is also the perianth. The perianth consists of the corolla, which are the petals, and the calyx, which consists of sepals. Above that, you're going to have the reproductive portions. The male portions are referred to as stamen, anther, and filament, and the female portions are referred to as carpel or pistil. And you have the stigma, the style, and the ovary. Inside the ovary is the ovule. Once that flower is pollinated, the ovule will become a zygote or a seed, and the receptacle will grow and surround it and become a fruit. The corolla or the petals tend to be colorful and actually attract the pollinator. There are basically 4 kinds or types of flowers: a complete, which has everything: stamen, pistil, petals, and sepals. An incomplete is missing one or more of those 4 parts. Imperfect is a flower that lacks one of the reproductive structures, and so it's referred to as imperfect flower. A perfect flower, on the other hand, contains both reproductive parts, meaning it has both male and female. Now finally, let's look at dioecious versus monoecious. There are certain plants that bear only male flowers, which are considered to be staminate, or only bear female flowers, or referred to as being pistillate. Species in which the sexes are separated into staminate and pistillate plants are called dioecious, and most of our hollies are in that category. Monoecious plants are those that have both male and female flowers separated but on the same plant: corn, cons, begonias. Now, monocots and dicots are 2 terms that we refer to in the area of angiosperms. Monocots only have 1 cotyledon, where dicots have 2 cotyledon. Monocots have parallel veins, and dicots have net veins in their leaves. Monocots always have fibrous roots. Dicots may have primary and fibrous roots. Monocots consist of things like grasses, lilies, hosta, and perhaps only 10% are going to be woody, things like bamboo and palms. Where dicots are about 50% are woody plants, and the others are more herbaceous materials. Now that you've gone through a good overview of botany, some of the basics of botany, remember, be sure to take the short quiz and read any supplemental materials before you move on to the next presentation or video.